So we know that it works. And we know that to get employees to the same point they were with their DB plans, we need to aggressively auto-enroll and auto-escalate them.
This is 401k Specialist Editor-in-Chief Brian Anderson, and this is the 401k Specialist Podcast. No matter how easy workplace retirement plan sponsors try to make it, many employees still don't enroll in their company's 401k plan, largely due to a lack of information and a lack of confidence in the basics of investing. This is a problem that has been confounding retirement plan advisors and plan sponsors for years. Even with many of today's plans being designed so the average worker can get started with little to no effort, there is still a significant percentage of employees who aren't participating. Recently, the folks at Principal Financial Group wrote a white paper about this problem and how maybe instead of making it easier to enroll, we need to start concentrating on making it harder to avoid. We're going to talk about it right after this brief message.
Workplace retirement plans are intended to help employees achieve financial security in retirement, but their success depends on a critical factor, enrollment. To better understand the reasons why someone isn't contributing to the retirement plan, Principal surveyed those individuals who are eligible for their workplace retirement plan but currently not participating. Find out why employees aren't participating in their 401ks and other retirement trends at principal.com/retirement-insights.
Here today to talk about how to make saving in a 401k plan downright hard to avoid, we have Marc Howell and Felix Okwaning, who each serve as Managing Directors, Enhanced Plan Design at Principal Financial Group. Marc and Felix, welcome to the 401k Specialist Podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Now, we know that the use of auto features like auto-enrollment and auto-escalation has helped, as have the use of QDIAs and, of course, target date funds, but it doesn't solve the issue for everyone. Can you start out by outlining the overarching problem for us?
Absolutely. And I'll take a crack at it to start here for you. So to me, the issue is twofold, right? So first off, there are just a lot of people who are still relatively unaware of not only the fact that they have a plan, but some of the details as to how it works. And that is really despite the best efforts of going on about 40 years of communication now. For example, in that study you referenced, we found some pretty worrisome information about this. 59% of those people who were eligible for their plan but aren't participating currently actually thought that they were saving for retirement. That kind of worries me when I read things like that. And 77% of those who are eligible but not participating actually assured the survey that they had started saving as soon as they were eligible. So that's kind of impressive when you think about just that lack of understanding of how the plan works. And I've actually run across this myself too, not just in the reading through our study, but just when I've researched benefit programs at other companies and such. If you ever go and you look at the employee reviews of a company and you look at their details of the retirement program, it's kind of impressive how often you will see different employees with complete confidence say totally different things about their plan and how it's built and structured. So I think the lack of awareness and lack of understanding is definitely a key issue. And I think that's almost a double-edged sword because people don't get into the plan because they don't understand it. And sometimes they don't understand it because they're not in the plan. And so they're not interacting with it. So I think that to me is issue number one. Issue number two is really an issue of inertia, right? And we talk about inertia a lot as a good thing. We count on it when we try to auto-enroll people because we say, you know what, we're going to auto-enroll your population. This is going to be great. Human inertia is going to work for you. People aren't going to opt out. They're just basically going to go with the flow, if you will. But the problem is we never think about how that works in reverse as well. So just as an example, right, you go to auto-enroll a new employee, somebody who's 23, they're fresh out of college. They're trying to figure out how they're going to pay rent, pay for their car, their student loans. Groceries are expensive these days, all of that, right? So they opt out of saving for retirement. And if they do that, at that point, if you never re-sweep or anything else, if you just try that very first time when somebody hires with you, and if they say, no, thank you, you throw your hands up and say, great, we're done. At that point, inertia really does turn from a positive to a negative because that person who opted out, maybe when they were overwhelmed and just trying to figure things out, they're going to be really likely now to sit there and stay out of that plan for years. So that's why that article about making retirement hard to avoid is, I think, so key, because those annual automatic enrollment sweeps and an aggressive auto escalation features would help people like that immensely, right? Instead of making them say no once, if we were to make our employees think about their retirement at least once a year, they can continue to say no if they want, but most of them are eventually going to make the right choice. And we're going to ask them continuously in such a way that as their sort of personal and financial situation changes, when they're ready to be able to say yes, they will.
Now, Marc, in your recent paper, you challenged the industry to take steps to make it harder for employees to avoid saving in the company retirement plan, and mentioned auto-enrolling and sweeping in all eligible employees every year as a way to do this. Tell us a bit more, particularly about the most effective ways and times to conduct an auto-sweep.
So I personally think that the automatic enrollment sweep should happen at least once a year. I think if you can tie it to the point in time at which you're trying to do, or you typically do annual raises anyway, it's a great time to do it, because a lot of people really won't notice, right? If you get a 2 or 3% raise, maybe you get auto enrolled. Hopefully it's a point in time at which there's a little bit of extra money in the family budget. It's a good time to approach that. The other thing about it is, I think that annual sweep does, again, as I mentioned earlier, really force somebody to make that thought as to whether or not they want to be in the plan, and then get into the plan at a point in time of their own choosing. And I think that really reflects the fact that most people are going to have very different financial and emotional situations depending on where they are at various stages of life. I'm just going to give you an example of myself, actually. So when I first hired on as a young actuary working for a company specializing in retirement, I was in my, when I was in my mid-20s, I was married. We had a child. We had just bought a house. Really the idea of saving as much as I knew that I should was something that I was not prepared to be able to do at that time. I had to afford life instead. And so at that time, because I was a retirement professional, I cut down my benefits and what I was saving, but I did work quickly to try to get them back as far as I could. I think the difference, though, is for a lot of people, if you don't work in retirement, you're not necessarily thinking about that day in and day out. And so if I had been somebody who specialized in almost anything else, I probably would have cut my benefits and my savings down for retirement because of my financial situation and because of all the stuff I was dealing with for life. And I might not have gotten back in. So that auto enrollment, that auto sweep that's done every year, I think it should be done, like I said, tied with annual raises. I think it should be done for anybody who's saving under the rate. I work with companies sometimes who say, well, we auto enroll at 4%. And, for example, Mark said, no, thank you. I want to save at 2%. You know what? Next year, tell them, no, 4% is where we want you to be at. Get up there kind of thing. It's a good thing to do for your people. And I do think it has a lot of impact for those people who do make, one-time choices that they don't mean to be a lifetime choice, but that if we don't push them back into the plan, it can become a lifetime detriment for them.
Well, another strategy that you both advocate for is aggressive auto escalation. Felix, what would you say constitutes aggressive auto escalation? And in your experience, has it been fairly effective in boosting deferral rates?
So I believe that, yes, it has been fairly effective in boosting deferral rates when you talk about aggressive auto escalation or aggressive even auto enrollment. But let's really look at the bigger picture. If you think about it, employers have dramatically shifted from defined benefit plans, which could be considered as aggressively enrolling employees into their retirement programs, and now primarily use the defined contribution plan as the main vehicle for retirement. Actually, congressional research in 1975 pointed out that 75% of employees were covered in a defined benefit plan, which was employees were automatically enrolled in it, and only 29 were covered in a defined contribution plan. In 2019, you have 13% in the defined benefit plan and the 87% in the defined contribution plan. So because of that flip of the data, we need to actually start aggressively enrolling folks into the defined contribution plan to maintain that same level of replacement income that were being provided in the defined contribution plan. Now, what is interesting is that, and I think Marc mentioned a little bit about it, but we underestimated the power of inertia. Based on the principal survey, when a plan implements auto features, that is auto enrollment and auto escalation, participation rates are nearly 50% higher than plans that don't have these features. So we know that it works, and we know that to get employees to the same point where they were with their DB plans, we need to aggressively auto enroll and auto escalate them.
Now, there's plenty of data out there about how adding auto features such as auto enrollment, auto escalation, and automatic re-enrollment significantly improve participation rates and help some employees save more for retirement. Why is it so important to pair multiple auto features together instead of just adding one?
So I'll start out. I really think about this as kind of, because the work that Felix and I do is both centered with the HR function as well as the finance function, I kind of think about this as sort of both sides of that coin. So to me, from the employer's point of view, from the finance side, it's really to me a budgetary issue. If I'm going to think about auto enrolling my participants, there is a budgetary impact for that sometimes, right? It can increase costs depending on how you do it. There are some ways you can handle things to try to, at least mitigate the cost impact. But there, a lot of times is a financial component to that decision. Same as with auto escalation. To me, if you're having that conversation, it makes a ton of sense to have it all at once. Understand what the budgetary impact is of doing entirely the right thing for your people instead of just partially the right thing for your people. And then you can work on really how do you make that budget work for you. If the auto enrollment and auto escalation is going to add, X dollars to your overall costs, where are you going to find that cost savings potentially? And sometimes it's, within the retirement program itself. Sometimes it's outside of retirement. I actually worked with a client once that had been auto enrolling only, right? And this is, I think, a great example. They had about 18,000 people. They had a situation where one of their people actually went to their financial advisor in tears. They were 65 years old. They went to retire and they had a $10,000 account balance, roughly speaking. And so the financial advisor went to the committee and said, hey, this is a problem. So they brought us in to look at the situation. 18,000 employees. They've been auto enrolling at 2%, no auto escalation. Of those 18,000 people, about 10,000 of them were still stuck at 2%. That's why we've talked about human inertia, right? It's a very powerful thing. And so we did some modeling for them. We showed them here's how much better off your employee population would be if you were to auto escalate as well. And we were auto escalating them up to, I think, 10 to 12% at that time. They loved it. And then we showed them some design options. We said, here's what it would do to your retirement program if you wanted to try to keep this cost neutral, because we understand budgetary constraints are an issue. And they didn't love necessarily what it had to do, but they loved what it was going to do for their people. And so what they actually did was they went outside of retirement. It was an $8 million hit to their annual budget. It was a big organization, certainly. They looked at their bonus pool structure and realized that they could remove $8 million from their employee bonus pool. It was going to be almost unnoticeable for their people, right? A couple percent difference kind of thing. Nobody really is going to blink an eye from it. And they redirected that $8 million to help pay for all of the match costs associated with that auto escalation. Massive improvement on their employees' lifestyle, massive improvement in projected outcomes for their retirement. And they were able to do so in a way that kept it cost neutral to them. So I think budgetary constraints is, sort of the employer's reason. For the employee, I think it matters because, kind of like I mentioned, that person who was 65 and didn't have enough saved, every single day, every single, month, paycheck, year, it matters. The whole point of a 401k plan is that time value of money. You've got to get in, so you've got to save early and you've got to save more is typically the best way to make it work. And so if you only do the auto enrollment or you don't auto escalate fully or whatever the situation is, there are impacts to your employees by losing those years of rate of return in the market.
Let me just add a quick add-on to this. And if you think about it, the average recommended replacement income for an employee who wants to maintain the same standard of living pre-retirement and post-retirement is around 80%. And that's normally an industry average that we recommend. Now, I understand that it could be plus or minus depending on your income level, plus 80% if you're on the lower spectrum of the income and minus if you're on the higher spectrum of the income. We also understand that to achieve an 80% replacement income, an employee must save somewhere between 12 to 18% of their income. So now let's think about it. You're not going to go in and auto-enroll your employees at 12%, right? So you definitely want to pair the two together, auto-enroll them at a lower number, and then escalate it up to 12, 15, 18% so that they can actually replace that 80% of income in retirement. And that's why I think it's very important to actually pair the two together.
All right, great. You guys have also talked about building a strong retirement savings culture that makes it hard for the employee not to know about the company's 401k. What are some ways this can be done?
So the very simple way that I would say this can be done is most companies have annual enrollments at the end of the year, right? During annual enrollments, Mark mentioned earlier on, re-enroll your employees in there. So at annual enrollment, just as you put healthcare enrollment front and center of annual enrollment, put retirement as well front and center. I'm sure most employees, if you ask them annual enrollment, what does that mean? They would mention the healthcare without mentioning retirement. But if you put retirement front and center and say, hey, we're going to re-enroll you each and every year during annual enrollment into the base percentage of auto enrollment, that would get it front and center, and that would get employees to react much better to it. Mark?
Yeah, the only thing I would build off of that a little bit is, I do think there's certainly a role for employee communications, right? If you're trying to educate people about the plan and its existence, you've got to communicate it, but I think you've got to communicate it in a way that breaks through. And what I mean by that is we all get bombarded with messages all day long. If you look at your email, there's probably 90% of your emails that come in. Okay, maybe hopefully not your work emails, but on your personal side, probably 90% of your emails you might delete without even looking at them. You can just tell it's spam. So you've got to have a message that breaks through. And I think you can get really creative. I've seen some really cool ideas from the communication and marketing teams here to really do some stuff that stands out. I saw one, we did a mailer that went out with almost like a scratch off kind of thing, so like a lottery scratcher. And the idea was it actually indicated to people they would scratch off and they would see how much more money they could have if they increased by a certain percentage in deferrals. Just, a way to try to communicate that made people stop and say, hey, I want to find a quarter and scratch this off. I want to know what's going on. That kind of communication, I think, breaks through. I also think by the same standard, there is a lot to be said for sort of peer-to-peer communications. I've seen some really good campaigns where people and employers have used what I would call a retirement ambassador for success. And I've seen this really work well in like retail establishments or organizations where maybe they have a very diverse sort of spread out workforce, right? Where you might have a manager and 20 employees in one location and then a manager and 20 employees in another. If you can find somebody in those locations who's willing and able to sort of talk up the retirement plan, right? Over break, say to Felix, hey, Felix, are you in the plan? It's great. I'm getting 50% match and everything else. That kind of peer-to-peer communication and effort goes a very long way towards helping people understand the value of their plan.
We've covered a lot here, but any quick closing thoughts before we wrap up?
So I think the one that I'll throw out there, actually I have two that I'll throw out there just to kind of help people understand the scope of the problem. And this is something that I don't think a lot of employers necessarily know, and a lot of individual Americans really know either. Every study I've seen, and even some of the studies that Felix and I have done where we've looked at it too, typically speaking, you need to probably be saving anywhere from 12 to 18% of your income annually in order to be able to replace your standard of living in retirement. And that 12 to 18% is a combined number. So that's the money you save and the money your employer puts in as well. The reason I bring that up is if you're an employer, if you're doing a 50-cent match on six, that means you're providing 3%. That means you need your employees, if you want them to have a good retirement, to probably be saving anywhere from another 9 to 15% themselves. And probably the single best way you're ever going to get the majority of your people to do that is with auto enrollment and auto escalation. And I think it's just worth understanding that number and the reason to understand sort of the need as to why this needs to happen.
So, and again, the other thing that I'll add on to that very point that Marc made is that cost should never be the excuse from finance or the finance group of not automatically enrolling or automatically escalating employees. If cost is a challenge, I would encourage plan sponsors to understand their cost constraints around the retirement plan and then redesign the plan to manage the cost. And whilst at the same time they've redesigned the plan, they can now include the auto enrollment and auto escalation to actually keep costs within their cost constraints. That would result in a win-win situation for both the employer and the employee.
All right. Well, you guys have made a really strong case for why auto features can make such an impact in getting employees better prepared for retirement. Marc Howell and Felix Okwaning from Principal Financial Group, thanks for sharing your insights on the 401k Specialist podcast.
Workplace retirement plans are intended to help employees achieve financial security in retirement, but their success depends on a critical factor, enrollment. To better understand the reasons why someone isn't contributing to the retirement plan, Principal surveyed those individuals who are eligible for their workplace retirement plan but currently not participating. Find out why employees aren't participating in their 401ks and other retirement trends at principal.com/retirement-insights.